Eliza's world had once been full of laughter and warmth. She remembered her family, a simple wagon train traveling westward to find a new life. Her father, strong and kind, had always carried a gentle smile, while her mother's soft voice could always be counted on to comfort her. Eliza's life was a peaceful one, filled with the simple joys of family, the open sky, and the promise of new beginnings. But all of that was gone now. One cold morning, a terrifying sound broke the stillness of the quiet land. Shouts and the pounding of hooves filled the air. Eliza had heard about the Apache warriors, fierce and fearless, but she never thought she would experience the terror firsthand. The raid came without warning. The Apache warriors descended on the small wagon train like a storm. The air filled with the sounds of clashing metal, screams of pain, and the cries of horses as they ran wild. Eliza was thrown to the ground as her father tried to protect her, but it was too late. In a blur of confusion, Eliza felt her mother's warm hands grip her, pulling her toward the edge of the chaos. But then there was a loud crash and everything went silent. Eliza could barely remember what happened next. Just flashes of fear, the smoke, the fire, and the terrifying shadows of the Apache warriors. When she finally opened her eyes, her family was gone. The smell of burning wood filled the air, and the wreckage of the wagon train was all around her. Her heart felt heavy, like something inside her had broken into 1,000 pieces. She had lost everything. But amidst the destruction, something caught her eye. A small cry echoed through the smoke-filled air. Eliza, still dazed and confused, followed the sound, her legs trembling beneath her. She stumbled toward a bundle wrapped in cloth, hidden beneath a fallen branch. At first, she thought it might be another victim of the raid. But as she knelt down to investigate, she was surprised to find a baby, an Apache child. The baby was no older than a few weeks, with dark eyes and a small face, covered in dirt and blood. His tiny hands gripped the fabric of his blanket tightly, and his cries broke Eliza's heart. She hesitated, her mind racing. This was the child of the people who had taken everything from her, her family, her home, her future. She could feel the anger rising inside her, and the temptation to walk away was strong. But then she thought of her own mother, the way she would have never left a child to suffer, no matter who they were. No one else was around. There was no one to help. She couldn't just leave him there. With a shaky breath, Eliza scooped the baby into her arms. His cries softened as he settled against her chest. She wiped the dirt and blood from his face with the sleeve of her shirt. The baby was so small, so fragile, and for a moment Eliza felt a strange connection. She couldn't explain it. She didn't want to, and she didn't know how to care for a baby. But something told her that this child needed her. She carefully stood up, still holding the baby in her arms. Her heart was torn, filled with grief for the family she had lost, but also with a deep sense of responsibility. She didn't know what would come next or how she would survive, but she knew that she couldn't leave this baby behind. She would protect him. She would have to. The sound of approaching footsteps brought her back to reality. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. Was it more Apache warriors? Would they see her with their child and take her life too? The baby squirmed in her arms, still crying, and Eliza held him tightly, glancing around for a place to hide. There was no time to think. In a panic, Eliza turned and ran, her legs feeling weak beneath her. The war zone around her was alive with the chaos of destruction, but she didn't dare stop. She had to get away. She had to find safety. As she ran, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had no family left, no home to return to, and no idea where to go. All she had was the baby in her arms, and with every step she took, Eliza made a promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to keep him safe. Hours passed as Eliza moved through the wilderness, carefully avoiding the paths where soldiers or more Apache warriors might be. She had no food, no water, and no way to make a fire. She just kept walking, her feet sore, her body aching, and the baby's cries growing weaker as the hours went by. When the sun finally began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Eliza found a small cave in the side of a hill. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter for the night. She crawled inside with the baby, wrapping herself around him for warmth. Her heart was heavy, but she couldn't afford to stop now. The world outside was filled with danger, but here, in the silence of the cave, she felt a brief moment of peace. Eliza knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges. The Apache warriors might still be looking for the child, and the wilderness offered no guarantees of safety. But for tonight at least she had found a small haven. She lay down, cradling the baby in her arms, and tried to get some rest, knowing that when dawn came she would have to keep moving. The journey ahead would be long, dangerous, and uncertain, but Eliza made a vow to herself and to the child she now carried. She would protect him no matter the cost.
She would survive.
The night was quiet, too quiet. Eliza sat against the cold, rough stone of the cave, clutching the baby to her chest. She could hear the wind whistling outside, but everything else felt like a distant memory. The fire she had made earlier had burned down to embers, and she stared into the soft glow, thinking about what had happened to her life. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Stay strong, Eliza, we're going to make it." We're going to start fresh, but now her father was gone. Her mother was gone. The wagon train that had once been filled with families and dreams was nothing but ashes and dust. Eliza felt a heavy ache in her chest, but it wasn't just for her family. It was for the child she held in her arms. He was a reminder of everything that had been taken from her, yet he was also something new. He was innocent, too young to understand the violence that had torn through the land. "Where do we go now?" she whispered to the baby, her voice soft and full of uncertainty. The baby, quiet for the moment, let out a small coo, looking up at her with wide, dark eyes. He didn't know the dangers around them, nor did he know how much Eliza was giving up to protect him. But in that moment, the simple act of caring for him was the only thing keeping Eliza from losing herself. She couldn't stay here. The longer they stayed, the more dangerous it would be. The Apache warriors who had attacked her wagon train wouldn't simply forget about the child. Eliza knew they would come looking for him, and when they found him, they would want him back. With the first light of dawn peeking through the entrance of the cave, Eliza made up her mind. She had to leave. As she rose to her feet, the baby stirred in her arms, still clinging to her with a quiet dependence. She wrapped him in the blanket again and tied it tightly around her chest, keeping him close to her heart. She knew that the journey ahead would be long and treacherous, but there was no turning back now. She stepped out of the cave, the morning air cool against her face. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft pink and orange hues over the land. The wilderness before her was both beautiful and terrifying, a place of freedom, yes, but also of danger. Eliza had learned enough from her time with the wagon train to know how to survive in the wild. She could hunt small animals if she needed to, and she knew where to find water. But this was different. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was responsible for a life. Her heart thudded in her chest as she took her first steps into the open land. The baby seemed to settle against her, his tiny face pressed against her chest as he drifted back to sleep. For now, at least, she didn't have to worry about him crying and giving away their position. But Eliza knew that it wouldn't be long before the warriors came after them. They would track her just as they had tracked the wagon train. She had seen how skilled the Apache were at finding people. They had eyes like hawks and could move through the land without making a sound. Eliza pushed the thought from her mind. There was no use worrying about things she couldn't control. For now, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other. She had to get as far away from the wreckage as possible. As she walked, the landscape around her seemed to change. The rolling hills gave way to a dry, dusty plain, stretching endlessly in every direction. The heat of the day began to build as the sun rose higher in the sky, and Eliza wiped the sweat from her brow, doing her best to ignore the thirst building in her throat. It was late morning when she found a small creek, its waters clear and cool. Eliza knelt by the water and cupped her hands to drink, feeling the refreshing liquid slide down her throat. She couldn't remember the last time she had been so thirsty. She filled the small tin cup she had taken from the wagon train and drank again, feeling the weight of her exhaustion lifting slightly with each sip. The baby, still wrapped tightly against her chest, let out a small sound, and Eliza smiled down at him. She carefully unwrapped him, making sure he was comfortable, and gently splashed a bit of water on his face. He blinked his dark eyes at her but made no sound. For a moment, Eliza allowed herself to rest. She leaned back against a nearby rock, closing her eyes and listening to the soft rustle of the leaves in the wind. It was so peaceful, and in that moment she wished she could pretend that everything was normal, that she was just a little girl again with her family, living in a safer world. But reality had a way of reminding her that such wishes didn't come true. After a brief rest, Eliza stood up and lifted the baby once more. She had to keep moving. She couldn't afford to stay in one place too long, no matter how much she wanted to. The longer she stayed, the more likely it was that someone would find her. As she continued on, the land grew more difficult to navigate. The ground became rougher, with jagged rocks jutting out of the earth and thorns that tore at her clothes. She was forced to pick her way carefully, watching where she stepped as she moved through the wilderness. Her legs began to ache, and her feet were sore from walking for hours. The sun beat down on her relentlessly, and the heat made it hard to breathe. But Eliza couldn't stop. She couldn't rest. She had to keep moving for the baby, for herself. She had no other choice. Nightfall came quickly, and Eliza found another small cave to take shelter in. She gathered some dry twigs and built a small fire, hoping it would provide warmth and light through the long night. She settled down against the rock wall, the baby once again wrapped up against her chest. As the fire crackled, Eliza tried to quiet her thoughts. She had no idea where she was going, or how long this journey would take. She didn't know if she would survive or if the Apache would catch up to her before she could find safety. But there was one thing Eliza knew for certain: she would never give up. She had come too far to stop now. The baby, now sleeping peacefully in her arms, was the only thing that mattered, and as long as she had him, Eliza had a reason to keep going. In the quiet of the night, under the blanket of stars, Eliza made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, no matter how long it took, she would protect him. She would keep him safe. And so, with the crackling fire as her only company, Eliza closed her eyes, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. Eliza had no idea how many days had passed since she had left the burned remnants of the wagon train behind. Each day felt the same: endless walking, barely any food or water, and the constant fear that the Apache warriors were still out there, searching for the baby she carried. The landscape around her had changed. Gone were the grassy plains she had walked across at first. Now the land was a rugged wilderness, filled with sharp rocks and dry bushes that seemed to scratch at her skin with every step. The sun was her constant companion, beating down on her back as she moved from one hiding spot to another. She had learned to move silently, her footsteps light and careful, never staying in one place for too long. Every now and then she would stop by a stream to drink, but always in the back of her mind was the question: would they find her here? The Apache warriors had to be close. She could feel it. The air felt thick with tension, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Eliza's heart raced every time she heard the faint sound of a twig snapping or the distant cry of an animal. The feeling of being watched never left her, and then one afternoon the sound she had feared the most came. From behind a hill, Eliza heard the distant thundering of hooves. At first she thought it was just a wild herd of horses, but as the sound grew louder, her blood ran cold. She knew that sound. It was the sound of Apache warriors riding swiftly, their horses carrying them across the land with purpose. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. She quickly ducked behind a cluster of rocks, the baby's soft breathing a contrast to the pounding in her own ears. She didn't know how many warriors were coming, but she had no doubt that they were after the child. I can't outrun them, she thought. I have to be smart. I have to hide. Her eyes scanned the area frantically. She had been here before, the land was familiar enough, but this time it was different. This time it was dangerous. Eliza quickly crawled deeper into the shadows, clutching the baby tightly against her chest. She pushed herself into a small cave she had discovered earlier, hoping it would be deep enough to hide her from view. The entrance was narrow, and if she held still enough, perhaps the warriors would pass by without seeing her. The baby, sensing her fear, stirred a little in her arms. Eliza gently hushed him, whispering softly, trying to keep him calm. She pressed her face into the soft fabric of his blanket, hoping her own heartbeat would quiet so that she could listen for the sound of the warriors passing. She didn't dare move. The hooves were getting closer. She heard the rustle of leaves, the soft sounds of voices speaking in the Apache language. But they were too far away for her to understand what they were saying. Eliza held her breath. Every minute felt like an hour. Then she saw them. Riding through the clearing, a small group of Apache warriors passed by, their horses moving swiftly, their eyes scanning the landscape around them. The leader of the group, a tall man with long black hair tied back in a braid, was at the front. His gaze swept across the land with a sharp, calculating look, as if he could spot something out of place from miles away. Eliza's throat tightened. She felt as if they could see right through her hiding place. She could hear their horses snorting, their hooves striking the ground with each step. For a moment, everything was still. Eliza didn't dare make a sound, praying that the warriors would not notice her hiding in the shadows. The group passed. One by one, they moved out of sight, their voices growing faint as they rode deeper into the woods. Eliza's body trembled with relief, but she didn't let herself relax. Not yet. She waited until she could no longer hear their footsteps, until the silence returned. Only then did she dare let go of the breath she had been holding. She carefully peeked out from behind the rocks, scanning the area to make sure they were really gone. The last thing she wanted was to give away her position by being careless. When she was certain the warriors had moved on, Eliza breathed out slowly. Her heart was still pounding, but she knew she couldn't stay here for long. She had been lucky this time, but luck wouldn't protect her forever. She needed to keep moving. With the baby secured in her arms again, Eliza stood up and began to move quickly, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Her mind raced as she plotted her next move. She couldn't stay in one place for too long, and she needed to find food and water. But where could she go? The warriors could be anywhere. They were tracking her now, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they would find her again. As she walked, her thoughts turned to the child she carried. He had changed her life. Before the attack, she had been just a little girl, dreaming of a future that seemed far away. But now she was a protector. She wasn't just running for her own life anymore. She was running for his. Every step she took was for him. Every decision she made was to keep him safe. She had no idea how she would keep running, or how long she could survive in this wilderness. She didn't know if she would ever find safety, or if the warriors would catch up to her. But one thing was certain: she would not give up. She had made a promise to herself, and to the baby she held, that she would protect him with everything she had. Nightfall came quickly, and Eliza found herself near a small cluster of trees where she could rest for the night. She had been walking all day, and her body ached with exhaustion. The baby, wrapped securely in her arms, was asleep once more, and Eliza allowed herself a moment of rest. But as the wind howled through the trees and the shadows grew longer, Eliza knew that the danger was never far behind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was determined to face them. In the dark quiet of the night, with the baby nestled in her arms, Eliza made her resolve again. She would not stop. She would not give in. She would survive, and she would keep him safe. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light across the land. Eliza had already been awake for hours, her mind racing. It had been days since she had last seen the Apache warriors, but she knew they were still out there, searching for her and the baby she carried. The thought of them always lingered in the back of her mind, even as she tried to focus on the task at hand, finding food and water. The wilderness stretched endlessly before her. She had grown used to the solitude, the quiet that came with traveling alone, but the fear that gripped her heart never left. She had seen enough of the land to know that no matter how much she wanted to outrun her past, it would eventually catch up to her. Today, she was more cautious than ever. The air was still, and the silence felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. She glanced around, her eyes darting over every shadow and movement. The baby, tucked safely against her chest, was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger that always seemed to follow them. Eliza's footsteps were light, her body tense as she made her way through the thick brush. The terrain had become more rugged over the past few days, the trees growing thicker, the ground more uneven. She had learned to move quietly, but even the smallest sound could give her away. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and making the branches sway. Eliza paused, her senses heightened. Something wasn't right. It felt as though the land itself was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Her instincts kicked in. She quickly crouched behind a thick tree trunk, holding the baby close to her chest. Her breath caught in her throat as she strained her ears to listen. There in the distance she heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses' hooves, the rhythmic pounding growing louder with each passing second. Her heart skipped a beat. The Apache warriors were coming. She didn't have much time. She scanned the landscape frantically, looking for a place to hide. She couldn't outrun them, but if she could find a way to stay out of their sight, she might have a chance. Eliza's eyes landed on a small cave up ahead, tucked beneath a steep cliff. It was a tight space, but it would do. Without a second thought, she darted toward it, careful not to make a sound. The baby, still asleep, shifted slightly in her arms, but she held him tightly, whispering soothing words to keep him calm. As she neared the cave, Eliza's breath came in shallow gasps. She could hear the warriors getting closer now. There was no time to waste. She crawled into the cave, pressing herself into the shadows, her back against the cool stone. She held the baby as still as possible, praying that the warriors wouldn't see her. The sound of the horses grew louder, closer now. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest, her body trembling with fear. She could hear the warriors speaking in their language, their voices sharp and commanding. She had no idea how many of them there were, but the numbers didn't matter. They were after the baby, and she knew it. The horses stopped just outside the cave entrance. Eliza held her breath, her body stiff with fear. The warriors dismounted, their boots crunching against the dry leaves as they approached. She could hear them muttering, their voices low as they scouted the area. They were looking for something or someone. Eliza's mind raced. Could they have seen her? She slowly turned her head, peeking through a crack in the rocks. She could see the warriors clearly now, their dark eyes scanning the land. They were only a few feet away. Her pulse quickened, and she tightened her grip on the baby, trying to keep him as quiet as possible. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stopped near the entrance of the cave. Eliza could see the glint of his knife hanging at his side, the weapon a reminder of the danger they were in. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the trees and rocks. Then with a grunt, he turned to his men. "There's nothing here. Keep moving," he said in a deep voice, his tone filled with frustration. The warriors nodded and mounted their horses again, riding off in the direction they had come from. Eliza let out a quiet sigh of relief, her whole body trembling from the tension of the moment. The warriors were gone, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they returned. They would keep searching for her, and when they found her, there would be no escape. As the last of the horses faded into the distance, Eliza slowly let go of the breath she had been holding. She didn't dare move for a moment, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. When she was sure it was safe, she carefully stood up and stepped out of the cave, keeping her body low to the ground. The baby stirred again, his tiny hands reaching up to grip her shirt. Eliza smiled softly, brushing his dark hair out of his face. He was safe for now, but she couldn't stay here long. She needed to keep moving. With a quick glance around, Eliza began walking again, her steps cautious but determined. She had been running for what felt like an eternity, and the warriors were closing in on her with each passing day, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. As she walked, her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. How much longer could she keep running? How much longer could she protect the baby from the dangers that lurked in every shadow? But Eliza wasn't one to give up easily. She had already survived so much. The loss of her family, the destruction of her home, and the constant fear of being hunted. She had made it this far, and she would keep going. There was something in her now, something stronger than fear. It was a determination, a fierce will to survive. She wasn't just running for herself anymore. She was running for the baby in her arms, for the life she was carrying, and for the future that still seemed so uncertain. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Eliza knew that the next challenge would come soon enough. The Apache warriors would not give up, but neither would she. She would keep moving, she would keep fighting, and she would protect the baby as no matter the cost. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the land. Eliza sat by a small fire she had managed to build, the crackling flames offering some comfort after days of walking through the wilderness. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny body curled up against her chest. She couldn't help but watch him, her heart swelling with a sense of responsibility and love that she never imagined she could feel. The journey had been long, and every day had brought new challenges. The Apache warriors were still out there, and Eliza knew they would not give up easily. But something had changed in her. She had become stronger, more determined with each passing day. The fear that once held her back had faded, replaced by a fierce will to survive and protect the child she carried. As the fire flickered, Eliza thought about the days that had brought her here. The attack on her family, the loss of everything she had known, and the pain of seeing the destruction of the wagon train. All of it had seemed like too much to bear. But through it all, she had found a new purpose: to keep the baby safe, to carry him through this war zone, and to protect him from the world that had taken so much from her. She had walked for days, always looking over her shoulder, always fearing that the warriors would find her. But she had also learned to trust her instincts. She knew the land better now, understood its dangers and its hidden places. She had become part of the wilderness, blending into the landscape, moving through the shadows, always one step ahead of those who hunted her. But tonight felt different. For the first time in weeks, Eliza felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't because she thought the danger had passed, she knew it hadn't. The warriors could still be out there, still tracking her every move. But for the first time, she didn't feel so alone. She had made it this far, and she knew that somehow she would make it farther. As she stared into the fire, Eliza heard a soft rustling from behind her. Her body tensed, and she instinctively reached for the knife she kept at her side. Her heart raced, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't afford to give away her position. The rustling grew louder, and Eliza's grip on the knife tightened. She held her breath, waiting for whatever or whoever was behind her to make their move. Then, without warning, a figure appeared from the shadows. Eliza's hand froze, her heart skipping a beat as she saw who it was. It was the Apache chief. He stood tall, his dark eyes locked on hers. He was dressed in traditional Apache clothing, his long hair tied back with beads. A calm yet powerful presence radiated from him. The chief was not alone. Behind him stood several of his warriors, their faces unreadable as they watched Eliza. For a moment, Eliza didn't know what to do. She had feared this moment, feared the moment when the Apache would find her. But there was no fear in the chief's eyes. There was only something else, something she couldn't quite understand. Eliza stood up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She held the baby tightly against her chest, stepping back instinctively. She didn't know what the chief wanted or what would happen next, but she wasn't about to give up without a fight. The chief raised a hand, signaling his warriors to stay back. His voice was calm yet firm as he spoke in Apache. Eliza didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. He wasn't here to fight. The chief took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Eliza's grip on the knife loosened slightly, but she didn't let her guard down. She couldn't afford to trust him, not yet. Slowly, he spoke again, this time in broken English. "You, child? Apache child, must return." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The baby. She knew what he meant now. The child she carried was not just any baby. He was of Apache blood, and the chief had come to reclaim him. Her mind raced. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The chief was offering her a choice: return the baby or face the consequences. Eliza's heart ached at the thought of giving him up, but she knew there was more at stake here than just her feelings. The chief seemed to sense her hesitation. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Child safe with Apache, you stay." Eliza blinked, confused. What did he mean by stay? He wasn't asking her to leave the baby, was he? Before she could respond, the chief gestured to one of his warriors, who stepped forward, holding out a small bundle of food. Eliza's stomach growled at the sight, reminding her how long it had been since she had last eaten. The warrior lowered the food to the ground and stepped back, waiting for her response. The chief's eyes softened as he spoke again. "You need help. You have lost much. You are strong. You care for child. Stay, Apache protect." Eliza's heart raced. She had spent so long running, so long trying to keep the baby safe, that she had never allowed herself to consider what might happen if the warriors found her. She had never imagined that they would offer protection, that they would show mercy. She looked down at the baby, his tiny face peaceful in her arms. She had promised to protect him, to keep him safe no matter what, and now, the Apache chief was offering her the chance to do just that, to keep him safe among his own people, where he would be cared for and protected. Eliza's mind whirled. She didn't know what to do. She had come so far and she had fought so hard. Could she really trust the Apache? Could she truly leave the baby in their care? But then she remembered the promise she had made to herself and to the child she held. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him. It was about giving him a future, a life away from the war and the pain that had taken everything from her. With a deep breath, Eliza nodded. She had made her decision. The chief smiled, a look of understanding passing across his face. He gestured for his warriors to gather around, and one of them stepped forward, offering Eliza a place by the fire. For the first time in weeks, Eliza felt a small sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't alone. She wasn't running. She had found a place where she could rest, where the baby could be safe, and in that moment, Eliza knew that this was only the beginning of a new journey, one filled with hope, with healing, and with a chance for a future that had once seemed impossible.